All right, welcome everybody back to Divorce Unplugged for episode 11 in season 2. Geoff, as always, welcome again. Good to see you.
Yes, absolutely. A pleasure to be back and ready to talk about all things divorce and a little bit off topic.
We're going to go through got a list episode today. You're going to take us through 20 real world things to consider to get you on the right track after a divorce or separation.
Yes, because not only, I focus as lawyers, we do on the black letter side of the law. I think it's important to look at the big picture, and one of the big pictures is what are some other practical things, both legal and non-legal, that can impact you moving forward and make you either a better person or a better place to move forward with some confidence.
All right, so should we get stuck right into it?
I think we should.
All right, so let's get started on the first one. What do you think is the most important?
Well, most important legal one is dealing with your estate planning and your legal documents that follow a separation. So when I talk about that, let's talk in simple terms. You need to review your will if you have one. If you haven't got a will, it's important to update it to make sure your beneficiaries are covered. You need to look at your documents such as an enduring power of attorney. So who manages your affairs then after a separation? For example, adult children, in the event that you lose capacity either on a temporary or permanent basis. There are some other legal documents like family trusts and the like that might be needed to be reviewed to make sure that the beneficiaries are appropriate, or who controls those trusts needs to be sorted out. So you don't necessarily want your ex-spouse being in charge of your multi-million-dollar property in your trust.
No, I wouldn't imagine that you would. What about anything relating to insurance? Is there anything that people should get in line?
I think so. So insurance is important as well, because your insurance policies nearly sometimes your most valuable asset. So you've got life policies, you've got policies within your superannuation. So your nominated beneficiary of your super fund, for example. You've also got death benefits in some superannuation, which you might pay an extra $2 a week. So if you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars that may go somewhere in the event of your passing or becoming permanently disabled, you'd want to make sure they go to the right people.
So on that topic, what about financial planning?
So financial planning is quite important. So once again, if you've got a very modest set of assets, you probably don't need necessarily a formal financial planner. But again, maybe you do, so you can build up those assets. Conversely, if you've got some substantial assets and you've now had some financial damage from a separation, i.e. you've both reduced your respective asset pools, then you really need to plan properly to make sure that you will have enough superannuation or retirement funds to move forward in the years ahead.
So one of the biggest assets, I guess, is a house, and a lot of people would look at refinancing their mortgage. Is that something that people should look at or could look at doing? Very
important. So we quite commonly see that either a house is sold after a separation, or one party will retain it and buy the other one out. I think the mortgage is usually everyone's biggest debt. So it's absolutely critical, particularly now that interest rates have slid up over the last 2 years, that you look at whether you can refinance. And if you watch your morning television, you'll see that the CanStars of the world will be telling you that there's X number of cheaper mortgage providers. So refinancing your mortgage and saving yourself some money is really critical.
Yeah, we've spoken at length on this podcast about superannuation as well. I'd take that's probably one of the next things that people should look at.
Yes, for a couple of reasons. So firstly, do you have any superannuation? Do you contribute some money to your superannuation, and should you? Who the beneficiaries of your superannuation are, I touched on before. So I think it's worthy of exploring all of those things after a separation to make sure all of those things are properly in place.
So what about change of name and then the flow on from that, like your driver's license and passports, etc.?
Well, commonly, as we know, people do change their name on marriage, particularly the female spouse is probably more common, or people have a hyphenated name from time to time once they become married. So changing a name after a separation, a lot of people will wish to revert back to their maiden name. And there's sort of two streams. There's the formal processes of changing names, such as on passports and driver's licenses, the formal documents, I'll call them. And there's also changing in names, for example, on school records and other administrative matters, such as bank accounts and the like. So people will need to look at whether they can do that and the processes involved.
So a lot of people like to start fresh or look for a fresh start, what type of things do you see happen, or what type of things do you think they could do?
Oh, there's quite a few. I think trying to identify that for a start is, for example, looking at, well, what career opportunity or educational opportunities might you want to explore? So strangely, on a separation, you may have more spare time than you had before because you're not spending it with your former spouse. So that gives you an opportunity to reset yourself and say, well, look, I think now's a good opportunity where I can explore these things that I've probably parked for the last 10 years and to better myself in the long term.
Yeah, obviously going through a divorce or a separation can be taxing and hard individually. How could they go about those mental challenges?
Well, I think one of them is that getting some external professional advice can be quite important. So there are a number of counsellors, therapists, there are divorce coaches, if you want to go and have a look, who will help you understand some of the trauma, and separation is a trauma, of understanding yourself a little bit better and hopefully working through that to come out the other side a solid person and a better person, hopefully.
Yep. So a lot of things these days are done online, and we've got many different passwords and usernames for all different sorts of things. So how do we protect, or how would someone protect their privacy online and make those adjustments?
Well, I think it's important, and I've seen some really bad examples of this over the last 10 or more years when social media has been more prevalent. That one of the things that happens on a separation is that everyone has, particularly spouses, have access to each other's online social media. They have access to their bank accounts through passwords. So you've really got to do a complete audit of your passwords, whether it's Meta or Twitter or X as we call it, or whether it's your bank accounts or even access to other personal data that in the long run you don't necessarily want your former partner to have access to. So I think just spending a Sunday afternoon going through that and sorting that out and creating your firewalls or barriers is really important.
So you mentioned before that people may have more time on their hands post separation or divorce. What else could they do to keep busy?
Well, I think I've always, as you know, I'm a big health and wellness advocate. So one of the things you can do is look at what new hobbies or activities you can get into. So, for example, joining a club. Find what your new passion is, or what your passion was, and you've parked to the side. So that could be anything from joining a running club to learning how to play chess again, or the multitude of things in between. So it can be a physical activity, it can be a mental activity. I think it's good that you socialise and try and, whether that's either even online or in person, that you find ways to communicate with people.
Yep. So I guess, what if people have children? That obviously adds an element to a divorce or separation. What should people do if they are in that category?
Well, that's one of the hard ones, and you hope that gets addressed sort of early in the piece after a separation, but not always. So, and it's a thing that goes in flux. So, and I think you've got to try and address with your children the fact that the separation is obviously on a permanent basis, and what that really means for them. And how you do that depends a little bit on the children's ages. So we see a vast range, of course, from virtually babies and toddlers up to adult children, and even dealing with adult children in the instance of a separation. Is one party being alienated, or are they making a bad choice to alienate one of the parents? I see that quite commonly, where the children elect to stand on one side of the fence or the other and completely lose contact with their mum or dad. I don't think that's a great thing, and I think communication, even in the worst of circumstances, between separating parents and all of the children to try and reach an understanding, at least, is a really positive step that needs to be thought about.
Yep. So are there any other tips you've got for people to start afresh?
Well, there is. Look, what else in life can you do? Do you want to start fresh and build a new life? Do you want to look at a new job? Do you want to move to a new area? Sometimes a change of the green change, a sea change, a city change might be a thing to open up new opportunities, meet new people, start new jobs, and that's just something you should think about. Not being wedded to the old ways of doing things, I don't think is necessarily the best outcome that can happen.
Yep. We've got other things to think about Healthcare, I'm sure that's an important topic to make sure you're all over.
Well, there's two things about healthcare. One is your day-to-day health. I think it's important that you talk with your general practitioner about making sure your health is as best it can be, because it's a good time to reflect about those things. You've gone through a lot of stress in a separation. Is your health good? Is your heart good? There's also things such as your healthcare directive, which is, who will help, what decisions do I want made if I become unwell, and who do I want to manage that? So you can sit back. It's another legal document to be thought about, but it's certainly one that shouldn't be ignored.
You touched on the children aspect of it before, but what is a good way to go about, I guess, communicating and speaking with your children so they do, I guess, understand the situation as best they can, and to help eliminate the side picking that may or may not happen?
Well, I talked about the collaborative approach before, which is the family meeting, I think, and to try and work through these things. That may or may not work depending on the age of the children and what hostility may have happened prior to the separation. But even putting things in, sometimes you've just got to put things in writing and let things settle for a time. I've watched that happen on a number of occasions where, look, you might say to an alienated child, look, at the end of the day, I still love you. I will go about my life. And my door is always open to you. So please feel free to step back in when you're ready. So sometimes patience rather than pushing will get you a long way.
Yes, no, good advice there. Speaking of family, how can you use friends and family to help?
Well, friends and family are great and can be a negative as well, I suppose. So you can lean on your friends and family. You're going to need some support. That can be from as simple as helping you move house or move from where you're living to being a soundboard for various crises that may arise in a post-separation. The danger that I've seen occasionally is that you go too deep down the well, so to speak, about advice, where people with good intentions will give you advice that ultimately leads to conflict or a deeper separation, if I can define it that way, which is picking sides. You don't want that. You want your friends and family to support you, but you don't want them to sort of wind you up to do silly things or create further divide.
So what do you do with your negative friends, if you've got any, or intrusive friends? What's the best way to handle that?
I think the first thing is to be conscious of it, and to you can remind them and say, look, I don't want to hear negative comments. You're here. At the end of the day, as a friend, I want you to support me, but I don't need the negativity. If the negativity is consistent and persistent, then you've possibly got to walk away from them for a while.
Yep. So what about getting back your real sense of purpose? What could people do?
Well, I look at lots of different things. Volunteering comes to mind. It's a really good thing. The world needs volunteers. I see it every day, from community organisations to charitable organisations to sporting organisations. There are a million different organisations out there that need your help every day to make society function well and to support people who are in a less beneficial position than yourself. So look, I think even finding the time to volunteer for a couple of hours a week you'll find is a great mental health strategy just for yourself, let alone the people you're helping.
Yep. So you've touched on a couple of things that people can do to start fresh in terms of maybe looking at more education, a new job, getting a hobby, perhaps moving from their town to another place. What else can people do to help keep themselves occupied?
I think exploring new places is good. Now, you don't have to necessarily move there, as I mentioned before, but travelling, exploring, putting a backpack on and going and walk through a forest down the road it doesn't have to be a journey to Greenland. You can do short things that'll take you away to different places, and once you start exploring the physical world, I think the positive physical uplift is really obvious in a fairly short period of time.
Yeah, and what about people's own health? What can they do?
Well, I think apart from listening to our podcast and taking on board what we've spoken about, I think building a routine is really, I think, important. So what does a routine mean? Routine might mean things like getting a consistent amount of sleep, eating, looking at actually what am I now eating and consuming, and how much perhaps alcohol am I drinking, and when am I, and those sort of things. Just taking an audit of yourself, I think, and then using that audit to identify where there are some things I can improve, and then there's some things that I can do more of. So I think once you start looking at some self-care like that, you'll find that that's really beneficial in rebuilding a positive attitude.
Yeah. What about other forms of self-care? It's not just exercise and nutrition and those sort of things. What else can people do?
Well, you can exercise your mind. So I talk about reading or read, or listen to podcasts such as this, or even watch some things that are educational. So if you can expand your mind and take in different people's ideas, and there's lots of different ideas out there. A lot of them are good. You again sift through some of the ones that may not be as positive, but nonetheless, I think educating yourself will certainly then lead to better outcomes going forward.
What about moving on, meeting new people?
Well, I've said before that humans generally aren't solitary creatures. Some of that is personal. It's a personal preference. I think some people, from my personal observation, it's a personal comment only, sometimes move on a little too quickly into permanent relationships when there are still other fractures such as children that need to be resolved, and there's a negative impact caused by that. So I think it's a matter of reflecting on your personal values about relationships, but it's certainly something that you shouldn't exclude because love will find a way, as they say.
Yep. Well, that's great. That's 20 tips. So what do you think is the upside of the following 20 tips?
Well, I think if you look at the 20 tips and you looked at one of them every weekend for the next 20 weeks, and you did something about 5 of them, then I think you will be on the winning track.
So small steps.
That's it. You don't have to do all 20 in 1 week. I think it's important just to adopt the ones that best suit you.
All right, good. We've got a couple of minutes now to look at our health topic of the week, and it is happiness in general. So what is happiness?
Happiness is a really interesting topic because it's an emotion we talk about and we watch on television, we see it in movies, but trying to actually sort of science it out a little bit and then sort of is really interesting. So I'll start with this. There's a definition of happiness from the Book of Happiness being happiness is the experience of joy, contentment or positive well-being combined with a sense of one's life is good, meaningful and worthwhile.
So how do we measure that?
Well, that's a really interesting thing. I think potentially you can go in reverse. So I think people realise when they're unhappy. So this is not... But so if you can identify things that make you unhappy, then you can use that to look at other aspects of your life and as to whether they're actually neutral, i.e., I have breakfast every day. That doesn't make me happy or unhappy, or whether they actually create some positive aspect. Going for my walk in the afternoon with 2 of my good friends, and we have a lovely laugh every afternoon. That you could define that as being happy. But starting with things that make you unhappy actually helps you work out whether things are neutral or positive.
So is being unhappy a bad thing?
Not necessarily, because there's no life that we have that we don't have the highs and the lows, and sometimes you want the lows not to be too low or for too long. But my son, I think, talks about the 3 levels of fun, which I think is another way of looking at the 3 levels of happiness. And just explaining that, he says, look, some things are fun or happy at the time. It might be going on a ride at the Universal Studios, but some things like going for a long hike through the mountains on a windy day might be a bit physically demanding, and you think, oh, I'm not having as much fun as I thought. But when you look back at it, when you've accepted the challenge and passed it, they call that level 2 fun. Then I think that in the long run you'll look back at that and tick that as in the happiness box that I went and it was a worthwhile activity. The one that's a tricky one is the one you thought was going to be fun but actually never turned out to be fun at all. So the one where you went for that long hike and then the storm came in and then you had to get rescued by a chopper. So that's probably the one you want to try to avoid.
Yeah. So if you're not happy in the long term, are there any strategies that you can adapt?
Well, I think Tony Robbins, who's a well-known wellness guru from the United States, been around for decades, but I think he summarises it quite regularly and quite well, and he talks about if you're assessing something as being unhappy, that there's 2 ways forward, and that's either you've got to change your mindset about it or you've got to change your circumstances.
So ultimately, can we be happier?
Yes, I think so. So let's just talk, if I got 1 minute just to explain what I mean by the change your mindset. So you might find something that If I was talking about from a lawyer point of view, you might go to court one day and you've had a bad result, or you've lost a case, or as we call it, or something like that. Sometimes you can think, well, that made me unhappy, but you can, if you want to change your mindset, you can go back and say, well, what did I learn from that, or what positive thing can I take out of that to be better next time? So that's a changing of your mindset about something that had a negative result. The other one is about changing your circumstances. So ultimately, if something makes you unhappy, that it's that your neighbour, it plays loud music every night from 10 o'clock till midnight. You've got your simple change of circumstance in that case is simply ultimately moving, because asking him to turn his music off is not working. So you can change your circumstance, but you've got to be conscious of what the problem is first.
Yep. So ultimately, it's up to us.
It is.
Yep.
And you go back through that methodology I've just mentioned about happiness, and we've scienced it up a bit, and we've got some pragmatic tips. Use that as a guide, and I think you can ultimately be happier.
All right, very good. All right, thanks, Geoff, for the initially the 20 tips, and then also the tips on happiness to finish off. I'm sure the listeners will get a lot out of that episode. So that wraps up episode 11 for Divorce Unplugged. Thanks again for your thoughts and wisdom, and we'll see you again next time.
Happy to talk today again, Dane, and look forward to talking in the next weeks.
No worries. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Dane.